Okay, so one of the things that we need to consider most when we're looking at weight management is how we actually measure obesity. And I'm sure you're all already familiar with BMI, body mass index, and how it is categorized. That's been around a long time. So we've got some idea. If we look at someone's height, we look at their weight, we do the calculation, and we end up being able to put them into a category. And that's extremely useful, very widely used on a population level and an individual level. But there are some cases where we need to be really careful and make sure that we are interpreting it correctly. And that might be with someone with a particularly high muscle mass, like a rugby player or a boxer or some other athletes, women who are pregnant, and older people, because older people frequently lose muscle mass. That is, if you're not very active, it is normal to lose muscle mass as you age, even from the age of 30, which is a bit scary. But as muscle mass goes down, clearly the weight and height relationship is going to change. So with older people, it may not be as useful. So just bear in mind those kinds of things. And in a clinical situation, have you got someone with edema? Have you got somebody with ascites? So something else that might be affecting their weight, which is therefore going to change this calculation and make it less valid. We're also aware that the ranges that we use are not suitable for all populations, and we're particularly concerned about people of South Asian background. And that is because their risk of obesity-related conditions like diabetes and heart disease is higher at a lower weight. So if you took somebody who's 70 kilos and they are of a white background, someone who's 70 kilos of a South Asian background, same height, the risk would be higher in the people of South Asian background. It's a mixture of genetic and environmental things going on there. So you will find that there are different levels, as you can see on the middle column here, for Asian populations. In an attempt to try and decrease their risk of having obesity-related health problems. So we've got that different calculation. We know that there may be some other differences in different populations, but at the moment we haven't got data that's good enough for us to actually use to an accurate level. We haven't got enough data to make those recommendations. You see there's also a difference in waist. So we're looking at smaller waists being a higher risk. And at the moment, we've just got to use the data that we have got for other groups rather than looking very much more closely at the differences with different ethnic backgrounds. But South Asians, we have enough data and we know that we should be aiming for smaller waists, smaller BMI. So let's have just a little look at waist circumference. We use BMI all the time, and it's a simple, practical thing to do. But we also need to consider waist circumference. And this is because people who are apple-shaped, so when they put weight on, it tends to be around their waist, are at more health risk than those who are pear-shaped. So those people who might have larger hips, but narrower waists, they seem to be at less risk, even though the BMI might be exactly the same. So up until the BMI of 35, we should be looking at waist circumference as well. It is really important that we do that because of those different risks. And it appears to be because of the amount of fat around the internal organs that causes the increased risk. So people who are apple-shaped have more fat around their internal organs, more risk. So we're putting the two together to get a more useful measure of risk, health risk. So we've got some guidance on putting the two together comes from the NICE Guidance 2014. That guidance hasn't been revised since then. It's been reviewed and decided that it's still valid. It was reviewed in 2017 and is being reviewed again. But at the moment, this is what we have. So you can see, you can look at waist circumference, you can look at the BMI classification, but also look at the number of comorbidities present. So that's things like high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, hypercholesterolemia. So if I was overweight and my waist circumference was considered high and I've got hypertension, high levels of cholesterol and type 2 diabetes, then that risk is higher. So you would be looking at putting me on a diet, making sure I'm doing enough physical activity and considering medication. So we've got that kind of guidance on what we need to think about. But if I only had one comorbidity, say for example it was just high blood pressure, then I would still be looking at diet and physical activity as the main treatments of those conditions. So it's much better understanding of what we need to consider when. So this is a different way of looking at the weight and how we manage it. And I think this is really important, and I would encourage you to read the detail here so that you get an understanding of risk in relation to that more holistic approach rather than simply BMI. So in the stage 0, the patient has no apparent obesity-related risk factors. So the blood pressure is okay, the lipids are okay, fasting glucose is all right, within normal range. There's no physical symptoms. There's no other depression-related or functional limitations, so mobility or anything like that. No impairment of well-being. So that's a pretty healthy person who might be slightly overweight, but so what's contributing to their increased body weight? Let's look at weight management. Let's look at increasing physical activity. So as it goes down, the more severe the symptoms are, the comorbidities, and the impact on life, physically, psychologically, ability to do activities of daily living, well-being, all those things, that increases the level of management that you need to be considering. So this is really important, that we look at people much more holistically than simply considering their weight and their BMI. So in the session, we're going to be considering these things and having some discussion. What are the challenges with measuring obesity? So I'd like you to have a think through these questions, because that's how we're going to start the session on Thursday.